I had a pile of viewers writing in asking about an article claiming that an MIT doctorate had Christians terrified by his thermodynamic formulas that explain away God. Apparently, atheists had been posting this article all over the internet and harassing Christians and creationists with the downright delusional title, God is on the Ropes, the brilliant new science that has creationists and the Christian right terrified. There are several reasons why I say the author is delusional. The first being that every creationist I asked had never even heard of the research paper, which was 2 years old, let alone its author. So evidently these terrified creationists are the author's imaginary friends. The creationists who did read the paper, because I asked them to, weren't at all impressed, and with good reason. To help us understand this technical subject and article, I've asked a friend of mine to join us on the show. Dr. Andrew McIntosh is a professor emeritus in thermodynamics and combustion theory at University of Leeds, England, where he has lectured and researched in the field of one of my favorite subjects, combustion and explosions, for over 20 years. Professor McIntosh's research has varied wildly over the years, including biomimetics, which is the study of nature to develop new technologies, such as in developing a patented novel spray technology inspired by the bombardier beetle. He is a fellow of the Institute of Physics and a fellow of the Royal Aeronautical Society and has over 180 publications in journals and conferences and has lectured globally on the subject of origins. Welcome to the show, Dr. McIntosh.
Yeah, nice to be with you, Ian.
Now, I have to start off with this because this is how you and I met. It was just way too cool. We did not know each other, never heard of each other, and I was out in the middle of absolute nowhere in the desert in Utah back in 2006 with a geologist friend of mine, and we were investigating some dinosaur tracks, and just as we were leaving, this British couple pulls up in this little car down this rough desert road and climbed out. And we started talking with them for a while, and I think it was you who started talking about relating the fossil dinosaur tracks to the flood. And we were like, oh no, here's another one of these crazy creationist types. We can't escape from them, not even in the middle of the desert in the remote places of Utah.
That's exactly true. That's exactly what happened. We met unbelievably, literally at 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Way hot, way out in the middle of nowhere. We didn't have enough water, at least for really making good use of it to find fossils, dinosaur tracks where you need to put water in. And we didn't quite know where these fossils were anyway. We went over a railroad, and I said to Juliet, my wife, I said, do you think this is going to lead anywhere? Neither of us knew. We just carried on going. And we saw this little sign which had pointed us over to the railroad. So we thought, over the railroad rather, to these tracks. And we thought, well, it must be right. So we kept going, even though we didn't have much confidence that we really were on the right track. But eventually we got to a car park and we parked next to your vehicle, I guess, walked up to the tracks, and we could see them, but we couldn't sort of make them really visible because we didn't have water, which helps a great deal with that. And you just turned up, and I started, as you say, raising the issue as to the creation perspective on these things, and I was just utterly amazed that you and the gentleman with you completely were of the same mind.
Yeah.
It was just unbelievable.
Yeah.
And then we were, it literally was in the middle of nowhere, and we got to know each other.
Uh-huh. Yep, it was from one of those divinely orchestrated meetings.
I think it was.
Mm-hmm.
Because that was the way that we actually met. And the viewers ought to know that we've never met since. As far as I know, Ian, I don't think we've ever met since.
No, it's true. We've got to work on getting you over to Canada.
That would be lovely. I'd love to come over.
Okay.
Anyway, you want to talk about other things other than dinosaur tracks?
Yes, we did. Now, before we get into this paper in question by England, would you mind taking a moment to explain to the viewers what is thermodynamics and what does it have to do with creation or evolution? Good luck with that.
Well, look, Ian, you know all about these things, but as you say, the viewers often get thoroughly confused on these matters. Basically, thermodynamics is the study of heat flow. Thermo, heat, dynamics means movement, okay? So it's the movement of heat. And you and I have done a program, in fact, you might refer to it. You might give the link to this other program that you did, where you had kindly read one of my earlier papers, where I made it very plain that there is basically a principle, even in what's called open systems, that you're never really going to get something for nothing. There's no free lunch. You always, when you do some work, you always got some energy which doesn't do anything. And we could call that wasted energy. The technical term is, per degree, it's entropy, okay? So there is a famous law which lots of people get hung up about, including those people who are not our friends, who basically misunderstand the law. The law is basically that in a closed or isolated, I should say technically, environment, you cannot ever get more useful energy than what you started with.
Right.
Okay? So you're always running out of useful energy to do work. That really is the issue. It's called the second law of thermodynamics. Now, many people with triumphalist looks on their faces who oppose the Christian worldview and oppose the idea that creation was by God, try to argue, you guys who think that the thermodynamics is against us and that everything's running down and you can never get a free lunch and, you know, that you're never going to be able to, you say that we're never going to be able to get something out of an evolutionary process. You guys have forgotten that the second law of thermodynamics is to do with a closed, or technically it's an isolated system, and you've forgotten that we have an open system in the real world.
Right.
And they think that they've really got us by that. But of course they haven't at all. They've completely lost the plot by saying that. Because nothing will improve if you've got an open system, not fundamentally. Yes, you've still got the sun there, you've got energy coming in, you could even have particles coming in across the boundary, objects coming across. So when we say that you've got an open boundary, it means that it's open to heat coming in and it's open to matter coming in. So energy and matter can get in. Now, they think that that's going to solve all their problems, because now we can get energy from the sun or energy from a star or matter for that matter, come in and we can make machinery. Now, we need to just be careful here. It is true that by adding energy in, it does mean that the overall energy that you start with isn't the same as what you began with, okay? And indeed, if matter comes in, that matter could also break up and produce energy. And, you know, you basically got a starting point which isn't fixed. That is the issue. Now, if I add a load of energy to an open system, does that suddenly give me more useful energy? That is the issue. And the answer is generally no.
Right.
Not unless you've got a mind which can usefully use all that and make that into something useful.
And that's the key word right there, mind.
Yeah. Yeah.
It takes intelligence because, for instance, the one example I provided in one of my Cruvo rants, which got me into a whole lot of trouble. Oh boy. I simulated putting a frog into a blender. It was definitely a simulation, but apparently my simulation was pretty good. I got into a lot of trouble for that. But my point was that we now take our frog soup, which is, hey, it's taking cells, entire cells, proteins, amino acids, and we take energy from the sun, shine sunlight on it, shine heat on it, and we do not get life out of it.
I guess you got into trouble with the National Association for Preventing Cruelty to Frogs.
Probably that was one of them.
Is that what the problem? But you're quite right. All the amino acids are absolutely no use, Stanley Miller found, unless they're all left-handed, right? He was producing a nice lot of energy, zapping across ammonias and all sorts of other chemicals. But it did him absolutely no good because there wasn't an information, there wasn't a mind to make that into something useful. Now, is it James England? This guy...
Jeremy England. Jeremy England.
Sorry, Jeremy England, begging his pardon. But Jeremy England is a physicist. He's a bright guy from MIT, and he thinks he has found the underlying physics driving the origin and evolution of life. And he basically says that if you get a lot of energy together, shining on basic chemicals, you'll get it right. And he's really just repeating an old position, which is not new, which has been going on for many, many years by people who say, okay, Andy, it's true that generally speaking, you won't actually increase the information or the organizational content just by shining random energy onto a system. But what they propose is a sort of compensation view, which says that the amount of useless energy is going up in one part of the universe or one part of the system, while in another place, the amount of useful energy is going up. So what they'll say is that the amount of useful energy is going up in one place and going down in another. So they're basically saying that overall, yes, the amount of useful energy is going down, but while it's going down, you can actually get some useful things taking place.
Right.
But to be frank, that never actually happens. And nobody has ever produced an experiment which denies the basic point that I've made in my papers, that even in an open system, unless you've got the organizing ability there already, like a solar cell, which is an organizing instrument which takes in energy and converts it to do useful work. Unless you, and I call that a machine, right? Unless you've got that there to begin with, you're never going to get anything more just by zapping a lot of energy about.
Yes, because what England actually said, and I'm trying to be respectful, to me this is the most preposterous quote, but this is what he said. Quote, "You start with a random clump of atoms, and if you shine light on it for long enough, it should not be so surprising that you get an actual plant." End quote. Now, my rejoinder to that is it's much simpler to produce, say, a car, an inanimate object that is a restructuring and reorganization of atoms, than it is to get a living plant, which takes in that energy.
Yeah.
And as you say, it has actual biological machines in it. These machines take that energy to build the plant.
And he even quotes snowflakes, which is, to be frank, I've dealt with in my own paper. If people want to look at it, and please put the reference to it, the International Journal of Design and Nature paper, I've actually dealt with this matter of snowflakes. Snowflakes do go through a change of organizational structure, but they are simply reflecting that which is within the molecules already. which determines that crystalline structure. It's not making anything which wasn't there in principle to begin with. So this goes back to the issue that there has got to be a principle of organization there already. There's got to be a mind, you might say, or a program, call it what you will, which actually organizes the energy and makes it do something useful. That is the whole point.
Yes.
And unless you've got that, you're never going to get it. This is the quote by England. Clumps of atoms surrounded by a bath at some temperature, like the atmosphere or the ocean, should tend over time to arrange themselves to resonate better and better with the sources of mechanical, electromagnetic, or chemical work in their environments. That, to be frank, is just, it's so imprecise. He's just waving his hands saying there will be some sort of increase in usefulness of the chemicals. I maintain that he's actually not correct. It's wrong, because unless you've got a solar cell, or unless you've got, let's say, the surface of a leaf, which undergoes photosynthesis when you shine electromagnetic radiation, basically light, onto the leaf, it's not going to produce anything which is of any use to anybody, right? In the case of the plant, you need that chlorophyll, you need that photosynthesis set of chemical reactions, which is a lot of them, by the way. It's not a simple system. And that acts like nature's solar cell. And that then causes there to be, in that case, sugars, which enable the plant to grow. And of course, you've got to have the system within the plant to make use of the sugars. So you're never going to build a basic system unless you've got the programming or the storage facility enabling it to transfer the energy into doing something useful there already, Ian. So the whole thing's absurd.
All right. We've got to take a 1-minute break. Stick around. We'll be right back to continue this discussion.
The Complete Creation video series is just that, an exhaustive look at the science, philosophy, and theology behind the creation-evolution debate. In this 12-DVD series, Ian Juby starts off with a 1-hour presentation for the children in God's little creation. He then follows up with almost 11 hours of lecturing for the adults as he walks you through the debate starting at its surprising history and examining the evidence from biology, geology, physics, paleontology, and archaeology. Chances are any question you have about the creation-evolution debate is answered in this video series. With open captions for the hearing impaired, the series is both entertaining and educational. There are also free resources, such as question and answer and proctor sheets for homeschoolers. You can now get the entire set as an instant digital download or on DVD. Visit Ian's bookstore today.
Before the break, we were talking with Dr. McIntosh about an article on thermodynamics and evolution. Now, Dr. McIntosh, this paper brought home a point that, especially when discussing thermodynamics, is a major key that I always home in on, and that is the origin of the first life. And here he's clearly referring to the origin of the first life. You start with a random clump of atoms, and if you shine light on it for long enough, it should not be so surprising that you get a plant. And just a couple of shows ago, I mentioned this, and I had a couple of viewer responses that were quite blunt, saying that no, evolution does not include the origin of life.
It doesn't. It never does. Never has done. And the rank evolutionists will never claim that.
And yet, here it is. Again with England talking about the origin of life with regards to evolution. Now, it's interesting to note he talks about shining light on a random clump of cells, but then when you actually read the paper, he starts off with, we first suppose that there is some coarse-grained observable condition I in the system, such as the criterion, the system contains precisely one healthy exponential growth phase bacterium, at the start of a round of cell division. Well, wait a minute. He was talking about the origin of life. Now he's talking about how he starts off with life. He started off with a bacteria in his thought experiment.
So his thought experiment is nothing to do with, in the end, abiogenesis, which is trying to form life from non-life.
Right.
He's saying he's already got life there. Now, I will admit that it is a different issue if you've got life there already, but I will say this. You'll only simply grow plant life. You'll never grow any other life more than is in principle written in the DNA of that initial living system. So I agree with you. He's claimed to be talking about abiogenesis, but isn't. But even within what he is talking about, which is post-abiogenesis, you'll never get anything more than what you began with. And this, can I just say that there is actually a principle there is a principle in the thermodynamics work that really I have formulated, which is that you'll never get more energy, useful energy, than that which was there already, or that which is coming through the boundary in terms of useful energy. In other words, if I've got some sort of system which is there already able to capture the random energy that may be coming in, so I've got what I would technically call a machine, then that will give me a new starting condition. But I won't get more than what I'm able to collect using that initial system. So you never get more than what you started with. That's really what I'm saying.
Right. And the key there is the word program. So when he introduces a bacteria into his thought experiment, it's not just a bacteria. He's including the bacteria's information. It's program. It's DNA.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can't, there's no such thing, as I repeat, as a free lunch when you're dealing with thermodynamics. You never get something which is a perpetual motion machine. That's another expression of the same point. You'll always get some loss all the time. And it actually applies, interestingly, John Sanford deals with this and has suggested it, that really it would seem that within information systems, which is very closely connected with what we're talking about, that there are really laws to do with information exchange. You'll never get more information than what you began with, is another important principle. So this matter of thermodynamics is really underlying the information which itself is using thermodynamic machinery in order to store the information. So the DNA, right? The DNA is just a storage mechanism, really, for the information in living systems. That DNA itself is using a small amount of energy, but it is significant nevertheless, to actually store the nucleotides which actually make up the DNA, and the order of those nucleotides is using a machine is being used to actually store that information. So when you actually get mutations, it actually means as the opposite to what evolutionists say, which is that you may gradually increase the information. Actually, you don't. You always lose information, not gain it. And it's this type of principle which is outlined in my recent paper, which you've just received a copy of, which I'd encourage people to read, because we really need to promote this much more correct view about information systems. There's a lot of loose talk about information and thermodynamics out there, which I very much want to correct. So I'm very grateful, Ian, for this opportunity to do so.
Yeah, and to make an analogy for the sake of the viewers, let's take a CD, a compact disc, which of course has lots of information written on it. We'll leave it out in the sun. Well, there's light being applied to it. That light is not going to put more information on the CD. If anything, it's going to deteriorate the CD and you're going to lose information. So it's very much akin to DNA over time.
Yeah, very much so. So there basically is a law which is that information in biological systems is not defined by the properties of matter and energy and is non-material. It's transcendent to it. And another important conclusion which comes out of our paper is that information in biological systems is never increased just by random events. It's always dependent on that which you had there to begin with. So these are the issues which are not properly being addressed, in my view, by present-day evolutionists. And indeed, many Christians just don't seem to be aware of these issues.
Right. And I like the way you put it. The information is transcendent to the material, basically.
Yeah, absolutely.
The information stored in the human genome, in our DNA. And they've now transcribed it. How did they transcribe it? They converted it into digital information, which is stored on a computer. You can download it off the internet. Yeah. The same information is stored as molecules in the DNA, or magnetic stripes on a hard drive, or ones and zeros on the internet.
Yeah.
The information is outside of the matter, is what you're getting at.
Yeah, exactly. So, I don't know how detailed you want me to be on this program, Ian, but let me just briefly say this. I'll try and be as accessible as possible for your viewers. But there are actually a number of laws of thermodynamics, and there is two main ones, which is the first law, that energy is conserved. You know, it's neither created nor destroyed. And then conservation of energy is very important. Then the second one is the one that I mentioned right at the beginning, actually, which is that in an isolated system, the amount of useful energy is basically going down. Now, interestingly, when John Sanford and myself got talking, and he encouraged me to write that paper, which I would like you to advertise at the end, which is part of the Biological Information New Perspectives volume. He really had a lot of input into my thinking there. He's a very humble man and, you know, didn't want to be a co-author, but to be frank, I felt I owed an awful lot to John for his very perceptive comments. And he's a biologist, but really understood what I was getting at. And I'd like to encourage your viewers, even if they can't read the whole paper that I wrote, to read John Sanford's summary of that paper, which is in it's called the synopsis of the papers. Okay? But let me just briefly summarize what came out of that discussion. That perhaps we can't call these laws yet, but they're getting close to being called laws. The first principle of information is this, that apart from creative intelligence, information cannot be derived from nothing. There has to be a precursor bank of such information. And that's very similar to the conservation of energy principle.
Oh,
and the second principle is an interesting point, isn't it, Ian? See, here's the second one. Apart from a sustaining intelligence, all information degenerates in terms of its functional utility. Information will corrupt unless it is sustained by an intelligent agent. Now, that is very similar to the second law of thermodynamics, but it's written in terms of information. Now, you do need to be careful here. Many people think that the second law is about information anyway. It is not. It is simply about heat flow, right? And you've definitely made that point when you did your earlier video a couple of years ago, or whenever it was. So What I'm saying is that there seem to be principles of information which are parallel or a parallel to the laws of thermodynamics. And I must admit, I think I owe a lot to John Sanford for bringing this out. And then there is a principle of information gain. Now, this is really what I was getting at when I said that open systems are not the answer to these evolutionists who try to make out that eventually, given enough time, the sun will produce life on Earth. This is the principle of information gain. The information content in a system is never greater than the total of that which was there already and that coming in through the boundary. And that is, if you like, that's a law in its own right. It's similar to the thermodynamic law, which I outlined earlier, because I said you'll never get a machine to raise the free energy in a non-isolated system. You'll never get a machine more than what you had to begin with. In other words, just by random events, you won't get suddenly 10 million solar cells forming. If you haven't got a solar cell there to begin with, you won't be able to get a machine like a solar cell arising by accident. Now, that's to do with thermodynamics, but there is a parallel to that in the information. That's what I'm saying. Just like I was saying that you won't get machinery just randomly, which is to do with thermodynamics. In information terms, you won't get an information system either just by random events, random energy coming in. That won't do anything.
Right. So to make another analogy, let's talk about a computer that has information on it. Consider it an open system where we can put information in. It can take information in from the outside world. But if you're just throwing random ones and zeros at it, that's not information. It has to be directed information from an intelligent source.
You've got it. Absolutely. And so it may have not come over very well to your viewers, but it isn't simple, this subject. But basically what I'm saying is that just as there are two laws in thermodynamics, conservation of energy and a running down of useful energy in an isolated system, with an extra law, which I am maintaining is true for open systems, which is that you'll never get a machine by random effects to raise the free energy locally to do useful work, even in an open system, right? You could zap with the nearest star, that is the sun, as much as you like, but you won't get a useful pump or, how shall I say, you won't suddenly get a motor car, you won't suddenly get a spaceship arising, or people will say, well, of course, that's ludicrous, you never get a spaceship. But that's effectively what they're trying to say. They're trying to say that the machinery of living systems, like I mentioned photosynthesis, which is itself really a sort of machine because it's taking in random energy and converting it to sugars, right? You'll never get that occur in an open system, right? I'm maintaining that is almost a law. Okay, I'm not going to say it's a law because there's not enough people recognizing it as a principle, but it's certainly a principle in open systems, right? So I've got two laws, plus I maintain a corollary, an important corollary on the matter of open systems. Now I go to information and I find that there is a conservation of information principle. There is also a principle that if I've got a certain system, if I leave it running, computers will gradually corrupt, even in the software. We know that full well. We feel like kicking, the computer and shooting Bill Gates because everything goes wrong. Okay, I've been converted to a Mac, but it still even applies to Macs. But I like to say I've been converted twice. I was converted over 40 years ago as a Christian, and I suddenly realized in my latter days that I really need to get onto a Mac. But anyway, that's another matter. Okay, so information systems gradually run down, right? And there is a corollary to even that there is a principle of information gain, that the total will never be more, as I said earlier, will never be more than what the total of that which you had there to begin with, plus maybe extra computers come in, somebody gives you a gift of another device which has got more information on it. You see what I'm getting at? That you'll never get more information just by random effects. That's the point.
Programming requires a programmer. The question is, who is that programmer?
Well, that's basically what we're saying. So people are basically just trying to get around the obvious, really, to my mind, which is that you need a mind.
Well, this is absolutely fascinating stuff. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today, Dr. McIntosh. I had so many viewers writing in and asking about that paper, so I know that many will be greatly appreciative of your efforts to explain all of this to us, as am I.
Okay. God bless you all.
Dr. McIntosh has several papers that are must-reads, such as Information and Entropy, Top-Down or Bottom-Up Development in Living Systems in the International Journal of Design and Nature in Ecodynamics, or his paper from the Biological Information New Perspectives Conference. Dr. John Sanford also wrote a synopsis, which you can download for free at biologicalinformationnewperspectives.org.